from today's reading, or this part of the chapter, that today is really one of the most historically focused chapters of Daniel. And that's saying a lot for the book of Daniel since it's already a very history-focused book. And I think what makes this chapter sometimes so difficult is it really narrows in on a lot of the rulers and conflicts that happen in the intertestamental period. So we don't have a lot of New Testament stuff we can relate to. We do have some more Maccabees that we can touch on, like we did in chapter 8. So for those who aren't the biggest fans of history, apologies in advance. Now, while we don't have to remember all the different rulers and conflicts, I think this chapter does remind us of one of the themes of Daniel that we talked about earlier on, that Scripture is reliable and trustworthy. I think what's most remarkable about this chapter is just how accurate all the prophecies were. And it's for that reason that so many kind of critical scholars or secular scholars really try to argue that, this must have been written well after the fact. Because no person could possibly have predicted all of these things with such precision. And, to their credit, in some sense, they're right, no mere human could have predicted all of these things. But this wasn't just predicted by a mere human. These things were revealed to Daniel by God. Yes. And I think it's a reminder to us that these aren't just words on paper. This isn't just a good book to live by. It is the trustworthy, reliable Word of God. All right, so as we begin, I'm actually going to backtrack one verse back to chapter 10, since really the last verse of 10 and the first verse of 11 here kind of coincide and go together. All right, verse 21. But I will tell you what is noted in the Scripture of truth. No one upholds me against these except Michael, your prince. Also, in the first year of Darius the Mede, even I, stood up to confirm and strengthen him. So here we have this kind of divine or angelic being kind of noting that they stood up to confirm and strengthen Darius the Mede. And this is kind of really putting the bow on the discussion from last week concerning spiritual warfare, where we had the prince of Persia, a demon, possibly Satan, likely trying to thwart God's plan to have the temple in Jerusalem rebuilt. And this figure here is noted as strengthening Darius, who, as we noted, may be an alternative name for Cyrus, who, as we talked about, was responsible for allowing the Jews to go back and rebuild the city and rebuild the temple. Verse 2. And now I will tell you the truth. Behold, 3 more kings will arise in Persia, and the 4th shall be far richer than them all. By his strength, through his riches, he shall stir up all against the realm of Greece. So this is where we get into the actual prophecy now that we've been waiting for. And we have a vision kind of starting, noting 3 Persian kings coming after Cyrus, followed by a 4th. And of course this 4th, that is really the more important king for our discussion here. And I will note too, these aren't the only 4 Persian kings to follow Cyrus. There were additional ones, but really it's the 4th one that matters for our purposes, and that's why the vision only pertains to these 4. So, focusing in on the 4th one, most folks identify this as Xerxes. Now, Xerxes may or may not sound familiar to you, but if you've read the book of Esther, you actually know a little bit about him. Because Xerxes is the same king that's called Ahasuerus in the book of Esther. But what's important for our purposes today is that last part of the verse, he shall stir up all against the realm of Greece. Now this is a reference to Xerxes recruiting people from his empire to attack various Greek city-states. And Greece at this time was made up of just various independent city-states. and they may have shared kind of a common Greek ethnicity and culture, they weren't a united people, so to speak. And of course, all that would begin to change as a result of Xerxes' attack against the Greek city-states. While Xerxes did enjoy some success, such as pillaging of Athens, and the Greek city-states formed a coalition, and they were able to repel Xerxes. And I think nothing quite brings people of different cities, different regions together like an external threat.
Right.
And all of this kind of formed the beginnings of an eventual united Greek kingdom. It showed the Greeks that they didn't have to be these separate independent city-states. They could be united under one kingdom. And that kind of leads us nicely then to the next verse. Then a mighty king shall arise, who shall rule with great dominion, and do according to his will. And when he has arisen, his kingdom shall be broken up and divided toward the four winds of heaven, but not among his posterity, nor according to his dominion with which he ruled. For his kingdom shall be uprooted, even for others besides thee. So, as we've talked about in previous chapters, this mighty king refers to none other than Alexander the Great, who inherited this united Greek kingdom from his father, Philip, and then would kind of go on to amass this huge empire in a fairly short time period. Alexander began his conquest in roughly 334 BC, and 11 years later, he's dead. So, as we discussed, previous prophecies and chapters here, after some power struggles, Alexander's kingdom was eventually divided in four amongst his four generals. Hence, his kingdom shall be broken up and divided toward the four winds of heaven. You can see here, roughly, how his kingdom was divided up. And if we notice that last verse here, or part of the verse, his kingdom was divided not among his posterity, nor according to his dominion. So the prophecy here accurately notes that his descendants would not be the primary inheritors of his kingdom. Both Alexander's half-brother and his infant son, they never wielded substantial power and were both eventually murdered kind of in the aftermath of Alexander's death. And as we've discussed, his kingdom wasn't the same. Once you divide it up, it's not as powerful as when it was unified. And you can see in the map, that outer red shows what Alexander's kingdom was, and you can see it actually shrunk a little bit. So it wasn't the same power, and it wasn't the same geographic expanse as it was when it was unified under Alexander. Verse 5. Also the king of the south shall become strong, as well as one of his princes, and he shall gain power over him and have dominion. His dominion shall be a great dominion. So here we see the prophecy narrowing in on two of the four kingdoms that we discussed. We have the Seleucid kingdom to the north and the Ptolemaic to the south. And these are the kingdoms or dynasties that will kind of be the focus of the remainder of the chapter that we are studying today. And it can be hard kind of to remember all the different individual rulers and what the kingdoms are referring to. But if it helps, I have this kind of little chart here. When you hear the kings of the north, it's referencing the respective Seleucid kingdoms. And if you hear the kings of the south, it's referencing the Ptolemaic kings. And kings of the south are a little bit easy because they're all just variations of Ptolemy. The kings of the Seleucids, a little bit more tricky. You have Seleucus and you have Antiochus, but it doesn't really vary much outside of that. And you may be wondering, why is the focus on these two kingdoms? Why do we not care about the other two? Well, much of the conflict between these two kingdoms kind of centers around the border of their territory. And if we look at the map here, we see Judah, or Israel, kind of was right in the center there of the conflict. So this resulted in Judah often kind of being caught right in the middle of their conflicts. And it's just kind of interesting because throughout history, so many world conflicts center around or kind of involve the geographic land or space of Israel. So, focusing in back on verse 5. We're told about the king of the south, and eventually we're told about the king of the north here. And this really is the verse where we get the establishment of these two different kingdoms. So the king of the south, as we talked about, refers to Ptolemy first. And the prince here refers to Seleucus first, who had helped Ptolemy in battle, and later would then become king himself of the north. And as is noted, Seleucus' kingdom would end up being larger than that of Ptolemy's. Hence, he shall gain power over him and have dominion. His dominion shall be a great dominion. Verse 6. And at the end of some years they shall join forces, for the daughter of the king of the south shall go to the king of the north to make an agreement. But she shall not retain the power of her authority, and neither he nor his authority shall stand. But she shall be given up with those who brought her, and with him who begot her, and with him who strengthened her in those times. So here we now jump to Ptolemy II and Antiochus II. And we have our first real attempt to make peace between these two kingdoms. Around 250 BC, Ptolemy II and Antiochus II enter into a peace agreement whereby Ptolemy offers his daughter, Bernice, as a wife to Antiochus. Seems like a great plan, right? Join these two families together so they no longer want to war against each other. Well, there's a slight problem. And Antiochus was already married. So Antiochus had to leave his first wife, Laodice. But unfortunately for them, Laodice didn't really take the boot too kindly. She would eventually come back, convince Antiochus to give up Bernice and take her back. Shortly after that, she would then go on to poison Antiochus and arrange for the murder of Bernice and the child that Bernice had with Antiochus. But she didn't stop there. She's evidently quite spiteful. She also is alleged to have arranged to have Bernice's father and all the servants who brought her up from Egypt killed as well. So you can see how the second half of the verse was fulfilled. Neither Bernice nor Antiochus retained their power. First, Bernice was given up by Antiochus, and then they both were killed. And even those who brought her with him were killed. Those who begot her, her father, also was killed. So you can see how each part, this prophecy was fulfilled by the murder of those various individuals. Verse 7. But from a branch of her roots one shall arise in his place, who shall come with an army, enter the fortress of the king of the north, and deal with them and prevail. And he shall also carry their gods captive to Egypt, with their princes and their precious articles of silver and gold. And he shall continue more years than the king of the north. Also, the king of the north shall come to the kingdom of the king of the south, but shall return to his own land. So, with Bernice and her father dead, we are told someone from her roots will rise and take over. That someone happens to have been Bernice's brother, Ptolemy III. So, Ptolemy III comes along, and he's not too happy. His sister was just murdered, and it appears his father may have been murdered as well. So he comes in, he evades Syria, and he captures the capital of Antioch. And he also captures and then proceeds to execute Laodice. So he gets his revenge as well. And in the same time, he then, we're noted, carries their gods captive to Egypt. So in this time period, the capture of one's idols or gods is kind of symbolic that, look, your gods are inferior to my gods. And it also kind of was used to signify the subjugation of those people. And if we look back, Daniel, what does Nebuchadnezzar do? he takes their idols and he brings them to his temple. And it's kind of his way of showing, look, my gods are superior to your God. I'm going to subject you to me, to my rule now. Now, Secundus II, then he makes his own attempt to go after Ptolemy III, and he attacks Egypt. But, as we're told, it's unsuccessful. Hence, the king of the north shall come to the kingdom of the king of the south, but shall return to his own land. Alright, verse 10. However, his sons shall stir up strife, and assemble a multitude of great forces. And one shall certainly come, and overwhelm and pass through. Then he shall return to his fortress, and stir up strife. So, following the death of Secundus II, we see both of his sons rule over the kingdom of the north. First, Secundus III rules for roughly 3 years, until he's assassinated by someone from his own army during a military engagement. His brother then, Antiochus III, takes over, and he continues on with various military and territorial conquests. And Antiochus III would become quite successful militarily, and would become known as kind of Antiochus the Great due to his various successes. And you see, this language about strife. When you have war, of course, there's going to be strife, right? When you see assembling a multitude of great forces, overwhelming and passing through, it's all kind of speaking to Antiochus III's military success. All right, verse 11. And the king of the south shall be moved with rage, and go out and fight with him, with the king of the north, who shall muster a great multitude. But the multitude shall be given into the hand of his enemy. When he has taken away the multitude, his heart will be lifted up, and he will cast down tens of thousands, but he will not prevail. So, all this territorial gain from Antiochus III kind of spurs the king of the south to get his butt moving, which at this time actually would have been Ptolemy IV now. So he engages directly with Antiochus III in what becomes perhaps the most decisive battle of this campaign. It's interesting, Polybius, who was a Greek historian, records that Ptolemy, the king of the south, had 7,000 infantry, 5,000 cavalry, and 73 elephants. Whereas the king of the north, Antiochus III, was reported as having 62,000 infantry, 6,000 cavalry, and 102 elephants. It's a huge disparity between the forces of the two kingdoms. So, Antiochus musters this huge force, yet we're told he still loses to the king of the south. And if you notice, we're told the multitude shall be given into the hand of his enemy. The same language that was noted actually regarding Judah and King Jehoiakim. We go back to that verse in Daniel we just looked at, he was given into the hand of Nebuchadnezzar. So all this kind of seems to imply that God's hand and sovereignty maybe were directing this outcome. It is a huge difference in forces. So you wouldn't expect, you wouldn't expect him to lose when he's got so many more forces than his enemy. What's interesting here too is we're told that after he defeated the multitude, he becomes prideful and his heart is lifted up. But his success is short-lived. In arming his subjects to defend against Antiochus, Polybius records that his subjects now had the means to revolt against Ptolemy himself. So he arms all these people to defend against Antiochus. And now they're like, well, we don't really care for you too much as a ruler. You gave us all these weapons. Mm-hmm. We defeated the king of the north. Maybe we should go after you too. Mm-hmm. So Ptolemy would end up killing thousands of his own subjects who were rebelling against him, until eventually his subjects more or less prevail in overthrowing him. At the age of 35, Ptolemy IV and his wife are noted as dying under mysterious circumstances. So I don't know if it's God's hand or someone in rebellion poisoned them. We don't really know. But the death of Ptolemy IV then made Ptolemy V the new ruler. The problem is, at this time, Ptolemy V was only 5 years old. So, this provided the perfect opportunity for Antiochus III, the king of the north, to attack again. Verse 13, for the king of the north will return, and muster a multitude greater than the former, and shall certainly come at the end of some years with a great army and much equipment. Now, in those times many shall rise up against the king of the south. Also, violent men of your people shall exalt themselves in fulfillment of the vision, but they shall fall. So the king of the north shall come and build a siege mound, and take a fortified city, and the forces of the south shall not withstand him. Even his choice troops shall have no strength to resist. But he who comes against him shall do according to his own will, and no one shall stand against him. He shall stand in the glorious land, with destruction in his power. So it's at this point that Antiochus III now takes over much of southern Syria, including the glorious land, which of course is the promised land, Israel. And as is noted here, Antiochus III is pretty much given a free hand to do as he wills. With the kingdom of the south undergoing all these uprisings and rebellions, with the young king, he no longer has that geographic counterpoint in the south to oppose him. Verse 17. He shall also set his face to enter with the strength of his whole kingdom, and upright ones with him. Thus shall he do. And he shall give him the daughter of women to destroy it, but she shall not stand with him or be for him. So, Antiochus III, he's gained all this territory, but he's still not satisfied. Ultimately, he still wants to see the kingdom of the south fall. And it seems he maybe wants to do it without a fight. So what does he do? He gives his daughter, Cleopatra, and not the famous Cleopatra, by the way. He gives his daughter, Cleopatra, to Ptolemy V as a wife, with the plan that his daughter would undermine the kingdom and ultimately help destroy it from within. Hence, and he shall give him the daughter of women to destroy it. But what Antiochus, I think, did not predict was that his daughter would end up evidently being loyal to her new husband. Which is why we see, but she shall not stand with him or be for him. Instead, she stands with her new husband. Verse 18. After this he shall turn his face to the coastlands, and shall take many. But a ruler shall bring the reproach against them to an end. And with the reproach removed, he shall turn back on him. Then he shall turn his face toward the fortress of his own land. But he shall stumble and fall, and not be found. So, after his plot to undermine the kingdom of the south failed, Antiochus then kind of moves his military conquest to the west toward the Aegean Sea. At which point, he kind of gets the attention of a rising power in that region, Rome, who sends a commander, or ruler, if you will, to stop Antiochus. And stop him, he does. Rome, under a commander, ended up defeating Antiochus and forced him to sign what is known as the Treaty of Apamea. And as part of this treaty, Antiochus' kingdom essentially became sort of a vassal state of Rome that would be forced to pay tribute to Rome. In addition, Antiochus was also required to send 20 hostages to Rome, including one of his sons, Antiochus IV. We'll get back to him shortly here. So, after his humiliating defeat, he goes back to his own land and is kind of reported to have started pillaging various temples. He had this huge tribute that he had to pay to Rome. So he's like, well, I got to find the money somewhere, so I'm just going to start going through my people's temples and stealing the funds. Well, in doing so, it's reported his own people kind of rose up and killed him. Hence, he shall stumble and fall and not be found. Not be found among the living, I guess. Verse 20. There shall arise in his place one who imposes taxes on the glorious kingdom, but within a few days he shall be destroyed, but not in anger or in battle. So, after the death of Antiochus III, Secellus IV, one of Antiochus's sons, took power. Now, the tribute owed to Rome did not go away with his father's death. So what did he do? He imposed taxes. And it should be no surprise that imposing large taxes is not going to make you too popular with your people. So, as the prophecy indicates, he didn't last real long. And not long after becoming king, he is reported to have been poisoned by his finance minister, Heliodorus. So he wasn't killed in battle or necessarily out of anger. It seems maybe his finance minister kind of saw he was unpopular and saw an opportunity to take over himself. Of course, Heliodorus would also not last long. Verse 21, and in his place shall arise a vile person, to whom they will not give the honor of royalty, but he shall come in peaceably and seize the kingdom by intrigue. So, in comes Antiochus IV, Seleucus IV's brother, who, as you may recall, was the individual we discussed in Daniel 8, considered kind of a type of Antichrist, a foreshadowing of what we can expect from the Antichrist. Hence the verse calling him a vile person. And, as we just said, he was a hostage in Rome. So how does he become king? Well, in kind of an unusual twist, shortly before Secellus' death, Antiochus IV was exchanged for Secellus' son, Demetrius. And what's interesting is Demetrius, not Antiochus, would technically have been the rightful heir to the throne, which is why the prophecy notes that he will not be given the honor of royalty, because Antiochus IV is not the rightful heir, but Demetrius. So, Antiochus IV, he's released, he hears his brother is dead, and he thinks, oh, this is a great opportunity for me to take over. He gathers an army, he marches in, and he claims the throne. Heliodorus, he pretty much immediately abandons the throne, he flees the city without a fight. So in that sense, it was kind of taken peaceably. He marches in, the other guy just leaves right away, and he's like, all right. Verse 22. With the force of a flood they shall be swept away from before him, and be broken. And also the prince of the covenant. And after the league is made with him, he shall act deceitfully, for he shall come up and become strong with a small number of people. He shall enter peaceably, even into the richest places of the province. And he shall do what his fathers had not done, nor his forefathers. He shall disperse among them the plunder, spoil, and riches. And he shall devise his plans against the strongholds, but only for a time. So, a few things going on here. The Prince of the Covenant is thought to refer to the Jewish high priest. And he is kind of the one here that is said to be broken. Second Maccabees records that Antiochus IV deposed the Jewish high priest Onias III, who was opposed to Antiochus' attempt to kind of force down Greek customs and religious practices on the Jewish people. And the Maccabees further notes that Onias' brother bribed Antiochus, kind of entered into an arrangement that if Antiochus got rid of his brother and made him high priest instead, that he would help facilitate the Hellenization or the Greekification of the Jewish people. So there's kind of that, where the league is made, that's kind of where that references to. But the deceit component comes in when Onias' brother kind of gets a little taste of his own medicine, and he found himself getting deposed of the high priest position by somebody else who offered Antiochus an even bigger bribe. And this person wasn't even from kind of the royal priestly class. Now, kind of along this line here, we get a reference to a small number of people. And this seems to be referring to the Jews in Jerusalem, and perhaps I think more specifically, Jews who chose to side with Antiochus. Finally, kind of in verse 24, we actually get a little bit more information about Antiochus as well. One, that he plundered his people's temples, I think to an extent greater than that of his predecessors, but also that he lived an extraordinarily lavish lifestyle, and was actually known to kind of give some of these extravagant gifts to just complete strangers. And it's almost like he was trying to make up for the fact that, one, he was not the rightful heir, and two, he was still going around pillaging temples and such. Yeah. So he would go and do that, and then he would gift, to a complete stranger, like some very lavish gift that he didn't even know. So it's kind of an interesting little detail about him. Verse 25. He shall stir up his power and his courage against the king of the south with a great army. And the king of the south shall be stirred up to battle with a very great and mighty army. But he shall not stand, for they shall devise plans against him. Yes, those who eat of the portion of his delicacies shall destroy him. His army shall be swept away, and many shall fall down slain. So here we have the king of the south, Ptolemy VI, plotting to retake Judah along with other territory previously owned by the kingdom of the south. Unfortunately for Ptolemy, his highest officials and servants, it seems, were plotting against him and undermining his efforts. The prophecy says, he shall not stand, for they shall devise plans against him. And it tells us who. It's those who are eating the king's own food. And who would that be? The king's highest officials and servants that are serving in the king's court. If we go back to the early part of Daniel, they're going to be fed the king's delicacies because they were to serve in the king's court. And historically, it's kind of noted that Antiochus somehow learned of Ptolemy's planned attack. So he was able to then prepare for it. So perhaps they are undermining him and feeding some of this information to Antiochus. We don't really know. But either way, Ptolemy was defeated and then captured by Antiochus. And this gave Antiochus control over most of Egypt at this point. Verse 27. Both these kings' hearts shall be bent on evil, and they shall speak lies at the same table, but it shall not prosper. For the end will still be at the appointed time. While returning to his land with great riches, his heart shall be moved against the holy covenant. So he shall do damage and return to his own land. So, after Ptolemy's capture, Antiochus made an agreement or alliance with him, and he reset him up as ruler of the kingdom of the south, probably with the intention that he would act as some form of vassal state for Antiochus. But as the verse notes, both Antiochus and Ptolemy were trying to manipulate the other. They're both speaking lies. And neither probably had the intention of honoring whatever agreement they reached. On top of that, while Antiochus was trying to set up Ptolemy VI as king, kind of the ruling class of the kingdom of South set up Ptolemy's younger brother, Ptolemy VII, as king. Now, at some point, the brothers would rejoin forces and actually become co-rulers. And this will then spur Antiochus again to come back and try to conquer the rest of the kingdom of the south. Verse 29. At the appointed time he shall return and go toward the south. But it shall not be like the former or the latter. For ships from Cyprus shall come against him. Therefore he shall be grieved and return in rage against the holy covenant and do damage. So he shall return and show regard for those who forsake the holy covenant. So here we are again, king of the north going to attack the king of the south, only to be stopped by ships from Cyprus, which have him turn around and go back grieved and enraged. So interestingly enough, this actually refers to Rome again coming and interfering. So when Rome heard that Antiochus was headed again toward the king of the south, Rome sent a fleet to intervene and stop Antiochus. The Roman consul, Gaius Populus, is reported to have confronted Antiochus and handed him a letter from the Roman Senate ordering him to withdraw from Egypt and go back home. And Antiochus responded with a request for time to think about it. It's like, give me a minute, let me think about it. I'll give you a response later. And what the Roman diplomat here did was kind of quite audacious, I might say. It's reported that he grabbed a nearby stick and drew a circle around Antiochus, and he said that he needed a decision before he left that circle. So, pretty bold and pretty embarrassing for Antiochus. Nonetheless, Antiochus did agree to withdraw his troops and head back home. Clearly a hit to his pride, and as the verse notes, he shall be grieved and will return in rage. And it kind of sets the stage, I think, a bit and reveals his frame of mind and emotional state as he's returning back and then is about to commit these various atrocities against Jerusalem. But before we go on, I want to look a little closer at the ships from Cyprus. Now, a more accurate translation might be ships from Kittim. And if you look at your translator notes, for those with NKJV, it actually says Hebrew literally Kittim. And a lot of other translations do just simply say Kittim. So what's interesting about this is there's only one other spot in the Bible where we see a reference about ships coming from Kittim. And that is actually in Numbers 24, within one of Balaam's prophecies. So you see Numbers 24:24, but ships shall come from the coast of Cyprus or Kittim. And within that same prophecy, we have a messianic prophecy, interestingly enough. 24:17, I see him, but not now. I behold him, but not near. A star shall come out of Jacob. A scepter shall rise out of Israel, and batter the brow of Moab, and destroy all the sons of Tomal. So it's interesting that the vision seems to be making this connection here. And what do we know? What do we know about Rome? What kingdom does the Messiah come from? He comes out of the kingdom of Rome. So it's interesting to me that we're making this reference here to a messianic prophecy. It's almost as if a sign that at this point, the time is coming near when the Messiah will come. And if you see here in the prophecy, the time's not here. I see him, but not now. I behold him, but not near. So it's almost as if he's saying, now the time is near. We're within 100 or so years of Jesus coming. And forces shall be mustered by him, and they shall defile the sanctuary fortress. Then they shall take away the daily sacrifices, and place there the abomination of desolation. Those who do wickedly against the covenant, he shall corrupt with flattery. But the people who know their God shall be strong, and carry out great exploits. So here we have Antiochus and the Jews who rejected God, hence they kind of joined forces to oppose the Jews who remained faithful to God. He corrupted these Jews, with flattery, with deception. Now, I won't go through all the Maccabean passages that we already discussed in chapter 8, but to kind of recap, First Maccabees notes that circumcision, possession of scripture, sacrifices, their feast days, all these other Jewish practices and customs were forbidden, and generally under the penalty of death. And concerning the abomination of desolation, this particular instance of this reference, it's probably referring to the instance recorded in 2 Maccabees where an idol, often thought to be Zeus, was set up in the temple. And on top of that, 1st and 2nd Maccabees kind of indicate that certain unclean sacrifices, probably pigs, were made in a Jewish temple. So, can't get too much worse than setting up a statue of Zeus in the temple and sacrificing pigs. But, as the prophecy notes, there will be Jews who remain faithful to God and actively resist. Look at 1 Maccabees 1. But many in Israel stood firm, and were resolved in their hearts not to eat unclean food. They chose to die rather than to be defiled by foot or to profane the holy covenant. And they did die. Or 1 Maccabees 2. We will not obey the king's words by turning aside from our religion to the right hand or to the left. Verse 33. And those of the people who understand shall instruct many. Yet for many days they shall fall by sword and flame, by captivity and plundering. Now when they fall, they shall be aided with a little help, but many shall join with them by intrigue. And some of those of understanding shall fall, to refine them, purify them, and make them white, till the time of the end, because it is still for the appointed time. So here, those who have understanding are those who have faith in and are faithful to God. You know, these are the folks who are studying and understanding His Word and are able to apply it to their life. They're able to respond to the challenges that they're facing because of their understanding of God's Word and because of their faith in God. And they become examples to others, witnesses, you know, to what it looks like to stand up as a believer. And as a result, many shall join them. You know, Matthew tells us that we're supposed to be a light to the world. You know, let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven. I think it's a reminder to us that sometimes the strongest way to witness to somebody is how you live your life. You don't even have to talk about the Bible, or you don't have to talk about Jesus, but by living a moral life, you know, people will notice that. You know, especially when you're going through trials. You know, and they see you handling it with much more peace than maybe someone that doesn't have God. You know, it might make them wonder, like, well, how are you going through this so well? You know, or why did you do this? You know, why are you so nice to this person who is so mean to you? You know, it might get them to start questioning and start wondering. And that might open up a possibility to talk about God. And I think it also notes here too, you know, some of them will fall, right? They are going to get persecuted. And we too, you know, will be persecuted. But God uses persecution. He uses trials to strengthen them, to purify them. You know, it's that old kind of cliche, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And with that, I want to end with a passage from James. James 1. My brethren, count it all joy when you fall into various trials, knowing that the testing of your faith produces patience. But let patience have its perfect work, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking nothing. Amen.